I found this, your box. And this. I didn't know you kept it.
Before we get into today's story, if you're new here, welcome to the Payback Files. We cover real stories about betrayal, justice, and the people who fight back when no one else will. Hit that subscribe button and the bell so you never miss one. These stories are worth staying for. Now let's get into it. I didn't expect anything. That was probably the saddest part. When you spend enough years being the person who gets left behind, you stop expecting anything different. You make peace with the quiet. You learn to fill your evenings with the TV on low and the smell of coffee going stale in the pot. You convince yourself that ordinary is enough, that a man who taught shop class for 31 years and knows how to wire a house and fix a carburetor doesn't need anything more than what he already has. That's where I was when the phone rang on a Thursday morning in March. My name is Ray Calloway. I'm 62 years old. I live in a brick ranch house on a dead-end street in a small Indiana town called Milford, population 9,000, not counting the people who moved away and never came back. I drive a 2011 pickup truck with a slow oil leak I keep meaning to fix. I eat cereal for breakfast 6 mornings out of 7. I water my garden on Saturdays and call my daughter Megan on Sunday afternoons when she isn't pulling a double shift at the hospital. My ex-wife Carol built a company. Not a big company, not Silicon Valley, but a solid regional construction and property management firm worth somewhere in the neighborhood of $80 million by the time she died. Carol Calloway, née Pratt, had always been smarter than me, and I'd always known it, and for 15 years that had been enough to hold a marriage together. Then it wasn't, and we split. And I stayed in Milford and she moved to Indianapolis and built something I never could have imagined. I didn't begrudge her any of it. Carol deserved what she built. She worked 18-hour days and made hard decisions and bet everything on herself more than once. We ended quietly, without screaming, without lawyers, fighting over furniture. I signed the papers, kept the house, wished her well, and meant it. The Thursday phone call was from her attorney, a woman named Sandra Pierce, who spoke in the measured tone of someone reading from a script they practiced. Mr. Dazd! Calloway, I'm calling to notify you that Carol Calloway passed away Tuesday evening. Cardiac event. She was 59. I sat down on the kitchen floor, not on a chair, the floor. My legs just decided they were done. The will reading is scheduled for next Friday. You're named in the filing as a notified party, which means you should be present. I drove to Indianapolis the following Friday in a fog so thick I almost missed 2 exits. Megan was already in the attorney's waiting room when I got there, sitting straight in a blue blazer with her hands folded like she was bracing for impact. She looked like Carol when Carol was 30, same sharp, dark eyes. Same way of holding the jaw just a little too tight. She stood up when she saw me, hugged me once, short and firm. She left everything to the Pratt Memorial Trust, Megan said quietly, before we even sat back down. Derek told me. Derek Marsh. The name landed in my gut like a swallowed stone. Derek had been Carol's business partner for the last 11 years. He'd started as her operations manager and worked his way up to co-director of the trust she'd established to manage her philanthropic giving. He was 54, tan in a way that suggested he golfed instead of worked, and he had the handshake of a man who'd practiced making other people feel small. Inside, Sandra Pierce walked us through the will in language so clean and careful, it barely left a mark. Carol's estate, valued at approximately $78 million, went in its entirety to the Pratt Memorial Trust, a charitable organization established to fund vocational training programs and skilled trade scholarships across Indiana. Noble. Exactly what you'd expect from a woman who grew up watching her father struggle to find steady work. Megan cried a little, quietly, looking at her hands. I didn't cry. I watched Sandra Pierce, because Sandra Pierce kept almost meeting my eyes and then not. Is there anything else in the filing? I asked. She shuffled a paper. There are some ancillary documents that require further review. I'd asked for a few days. I drove back to Milford in the dark. The highway stretched out ahead of me empty and flat, and I thought about Carol at 26 sitting on the tailgate of my old truck eating a gas station sandwich and telling me that someday she was going to build something that lasted. I had believed her even then. I just hadn't known I wouldn't be part of what she built. By Monday, Milford had an opinion about everything. Word travels fastest in small towns when someone dies and money is involved. The story that circulated about me was neat and unflattering. Bitter ex-husband left with nothing, probably deserved it. People who had waved at me from across the street for a decade suddenly had somewhere else to look. My neighbor Patty, who had brought me a pie when my dog died 2 years back, drove right past me at the gas station without acknowledging I was standing 6 feet away. My buddy Phil Garza caught me at the hardware store on Wednesday morning. Phil and I had been friends since the Army, 30-some years of knowing each other through moves and marriages and everything that comes after. He'd spent 20 years as an IRS field investigator before retiring to Milford to be closer to his grandkids. He had a slow way of talking and a fast way of thinking, and he could smell a bad number the way a good dog smells rain. "You doing okay?" he asked, picking up a box of wood screws and looking at them like they contained useful information. "Not really," I said. "Heard about Carol. I'm sorry, Ray. Whatever happened between you two, she was a good woman." "She was." Phil set the screws down. "Derek Marsh ran the trust board before she died. You know that?" "I know." "You know he's also been running it for 2 years without a proper audit. Nonprofit tax filings are public. I got bored one afternoon." He looked at me with those flat, steady investigator's eyes. "The numbers don't add up the way they should for an organization that size." I drove home and called Sandra Pierce. She answered on the third ring, and this time there was something careful in her voice that hadn't been there before. "Mr. Calloway, I was actually going to call you today. I've completed my review of all ancillary documents. There is something I'm required to share with you in person." She met me at her office the next morning. It was a quiet space, plants on the windowsill, a framed photo of a golden retriever on the desk. She set a document in front of me and waited while I read it. It was a letter, handwritten, Carol's handwriting, looping and slanted the way it had always been, the way she'd written grocery lists on the backs of envelopes when we were married. The letter was dated 7 weeks before she died. "I'm writing this to my attorney, Sandra Pierce, with instructions to hold it until after my death. If you are reading this, Sandra, then something happened before I could fix the situation myself. I have reason to believe the Pratt Memorial Trust has been compromised. Derek Marsh has been making financial decisions without board approval and without proper documentation. I have asked for an audit twice. Both times he has delayed or rerouted the request. I began keeping my own records 6 months ago. If my suspicions are correct, and the trust fails in its fiduciary obligations, it is my wish that all assets revert to Ray James Calloway, my ex-husband, whom I trust, absolutely. I have included this reversion clause in an amended codicil that Sandra holds separately. Ray will know what to do with it. He always knew what was right, even when I didn't listen. I set the letter down." My hands were steady, which surprised me. "The codicil is legally valid," Sandra said. "I had it verified by 2 independent estate attorneys. If the trust can be proven to have breached its fiduciary duties, you inherit the estate." She suspected Derek was stealing from her. She more than suspected. She had notes, spreadsheets. She was building a case before she ran out of time. I sat in that quiet office for a long moment. The golden retriever in the photo looked at me with the patient expression of a dog who had heard a lot of hard news and remained unbothered. "She trusted me," I said. "Not a question. Just saying it out loud to see how it sounded." "She trusted you completely," Sandra said. That night I called Phil Garza and told him everything. There was a long silence on the other end of the line, the kind Phil used when he was organizing what he already knew into a sharper shape. "She was right," he said finally. "I know a forensic accountant in Indianapolis, sharp as anything, and she doesn't scare easy. Her name is Diane Ochoa. She's worked on 3 nonprofit fraud cases in the last 4 years. Let me make a call." Diane Ochoa was exactly what Phil described. We met at a diner on the north side of Indianapolis. She was in her early 50s, small and precise. With reading glasses she took on and off, the way some people use a coffee mug, something to hold while she thought. She went through the trust's public filings for 20 minutes without speaking. I drank bad coffee and watched her face for clues. 3 red flags right away, she said, setting her glasses on the table. First, consulting fees to an LLC called Marsh Advisory Group. Derek Marsh's middle name is Allen, and Allen is his mother's maiden name, and there's a company registered in Ohio called Marsh Allen Advisory Group LLC. That's not a coincidence. He's paying himself through a shell company. That's what it looks like. Second, travel expenses. In the last 18 months, the trust reported over $300,000 in travel costs under program evaluation and site visits. You could visit every single site they fund twice a year for under $30,000. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. And the third flag, vendor contracts. There are 3 construction vendors on the trust's approved list. One is a real company, but their invoices show they were paid 60% above market rate. Another one doesn't exist. It's a name and a P.O. box. I sat back in the booth. Outside the diner window, Indianapolis moved around in the ordinary way of a city that didn't know what was being said at this particular table. "What do you need to build a case?" I asked. "Full access to internal financial records, bank statements, board minutes, contract files, wire transfer records." I thought for a moment. Then I thought of something. Carol had kept a storage unit on the east side of Milford for as long as I could remember. Business records, old files, things she didn't want to throw away but didn't want cluttering her office. Megan had mentioned it once in passing, asking if I knew what was in it. I knew exactly where Carol kept her spare key. She'd always kept it on a small hook inside her old jewelry box, the wooden one with the painted flowers that her mother had given her. When we divorced, she'd taken it with her, but she'd given it back to me 2 Christmases ago, a quiet gesture I hadn't fully understood at the time. She said she wanted it to stay in Milford where she could picture it. I drove home, went to the garage shelf, found the jewelry box, and opened it. The storage unit key was there on its little hook, exactly where it had always been, and underneath it, folded twice, was a slip of paper in Carol's handwriting. The address of the storage unit, the code for the lock, and a single line below it. "Ray, if you're looking in here, you already know what to do. Trust yourself." I read that line 4 times. Then I sat down on the garage floor and let myself cry just for a few minutes, for the woman Carol had been and the time we'd lost and all the things that go unsaid between 2 people who once loved each other and then didn't know how. Then I stood up, wiped my face on my sleeve, and called Diane Ochoa. The storage unit was a gold mine. Carol had been methodical. 11 boxes of financial records, organized by year and labeled in red marker, internal budget documents, email printouts she'd flagged with sticky notes, board meeting minutes with her handwritten comments in the margins, a separate folder labeled DM discrepancies that contained 6 months of side-by-side comparisons between what Derek Marsh had reported to the board and what the bank statements actually showed. The difference between those 2 columns was jaw-dropping. Diane spent 2 weeks going through everything. Phil drove down twice to help her cross-reference records against public filings and IRS databases. Sandra Pierce connected them with a litigator named Victor Ashworth, a man in his 60s with a white beard and the calm, deliberate manner of someone who had been winning cases for so long that urgency no longer required raising his voice. Megan came to one of the early meetings, quiet through most of it, watching everyone with those dark Carol eyes. Afterward, in the parking garage, she grabbed my arm. "Dad," she said, "you actually think she wanted you to have it?" "I think she wanted the right thing done with it." "That's not the same as me just getting money." Megan was quiet for a moment. She called me in January. 2 months before she died, she asked about you. Asked if you seemed happy. She said she wanted to see you, but didn't know how to ask after so long. She stopped and looked at the concrete floor. I told her she should just call you. I told her you'd want to hear from her. Did she say anything back? She said she'd think about it. Megan's jaw tightened. She ran out of time to think about it. I drove back to Milford that night with all 4 windows down, even though it was cold enough to need a jacket. I needed the air. I needed to feel something moving. The case built slowly, and then all at once, the way water fills a cracked foundation. Victor filed suit against the Pratt Memorial Trust and Derek Marsh personally in April, alleging breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, self-dealing, and misappropriation of charitable assets. Derek went on offense. He told the Indianapolis Business Press that the lawsuit was a frivolous cash grab by a bitter ex-husband who had no legitimate claim to Carol's estate. He gave a quote that made it into 2 local papers. Carol knew exactly who she trusted with her legacy, and it wasn't the man she left behind 20 years ago. The quote made me angrier than I expected. Not because it was cruel, but because it was designed to make me feel like the story was already written. I called Victor from my truck in a grocery store parking lot. "He's trying to control the narrative," Victor said, unbothered. "Let him. Every quote he gives is a statement we can use in deposition. Let him keep talking. Derek did keep talking. He gave 2 more interviews. He used words like stewardship and sacred responsibility, while Diane's spreadsheets were sitting in a law office showing he'd funneled over $4 million to a shell company with his own name hidden inside it. The deposition happened in June. Victor walked Derek through the Marsh Advisory Group payments one by one, slow and methodical, the way you take apart an engine when you already know which part is broken, but you want the owner to watch you find it. Derek's attorney objected often and loudly. Victor replied to each objection the same way, quiet and certain, and kept going. By the third hour, Derek Marsh was sweating through his collar. In 3 years of managing the trust's assets, Derek had directed approximately $9 million in payments to companies he controlled or co-owned. He had approved vendor contracts at rates far above market and taken a percentage of the overage through intermediaries. He had billed the trust for first-class flights to destinations with no program operations, for hotel stays at resorts in 3 different states, for a luxury rental car parked at his personal residence. He had done all of this while publicly describing himself as the guardian of a dead woman's dream. Diane's final report ran to 68 pages. Out of Carol's estate, approximately $11 million had been misappropriated or diverted through fraud. When the Attorney General's office received the copy, they opened a criminal investigation within 9 days. The settlement conference was held on a hot Tuesday in August, in a conference room that smelled like the air conditioning was losing a fight with the weather. Derek showed up with 2 attorneys and the look of a man who'd finally started believing what was happening to him. The tan was still there, but the confidence wasn't. Victor didn't waste time. Marsh diverted $11 million in trust assets to fraudulent contracts, undisclosed self-dealing, and the use of shell companies. He did this while serving as a fiduciary for a charitable organization established by a woman who trusted him completely. My client would like to say something. They looked at me. I kept it simple. Carol worked her whole life to build something that helped people who work with their hands. Electricians, plumbers, carpenters, welders, people like me. She wanted that work to survive her. You took it and spent it on yourself. And the only reason any of us are sitting in this room is because she was smarter than you and left a way to stop you even after she was gone. Derek stared at the table. I'll plead, he said quietly, waving off his own lawyers. I'll plead and I'll return the money. I don't want a trial. I looked at him across that table and I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt something quieter, something more like the end of a long piece of work when you finally fitted the last piece into the right place. Good, I said. The court hearing was on a Friday in October, the kind of fall morning that makes Indiana look like it was designed on purpose, all gold light and turning leaves and air that smells like something ending cleanly. Judge Paul Renner was 70 years old with a reputation for taking white-collar fraud personally. He sentenced Derek Marsh to 42 months in federal custody, full restitution, and permanent prohibition from serving in any fiduciary capacity for a nonprofit or charitable organization. Then he addressed the codicil. Carol Calloway's amended estate document is clear and legally sound. In the event that the trust failed its fiduciary obligations, all assets reverted to Ray James Calloway as contingent beneficiary. The trust, as directed by its former director, failed catastrophically and in bad faith. Therefore, the remaining estate, after restitution and legal costs, totaling approximately $62 million, passes to Mr. Calloway under the terms of the codicil. The courtroom was quiet for a moment. Megan was sitting 1 row behind me. I heard her exhale slowly, like she'd been carrying something heavy and had finally set it down. I didn't sleep that first night. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold while I looked out the window at the dark backyard, at my garden that needed one more turning before winter, at the ordinary shapes of an ordinary life that had somehow arrived at an extraordinary place. $62 million. The number made no sense to me, the way large numbers never make sense until you translate them into something real. So I didn't think about the number. I thought about Carol's letter, about trust yourself, about a woman who ran out of time before she could fix something she knew was wrong, and who had placed the last of her fixing power in the hands of a man she'd once eaten a gas station sandwich with on the tailgate of a truck. I knew what she would want done with it. Within 2 months, we had a new board. a retired state education official, a licensed CPA with 20 years of nonprofit experience. Megan, who took a leave of absence from the hospital to serve as interim director because she'd watched her mother build something from the ground up and had apparently inherited more of Carol than either of them had known. Phil Garza agreed to serve on the Finance Oversight Committee. He sat in the first board meeting with a legal pad and a mechanical pencil, and the focused attention of a man who had spent 20 years catching people who thought they were smarter than the numbers. Nobody in that room was going to slide a questionable invoice past Phil Garza. We published every transaction on the Trust's new website, every dollar in, every dollar out, updated quarterly. We hired an independent auditing firm and wrote the contract so they reported to the board, not the director. We reinstated the scholarship programs that had gone quiet while the fraud was happening. 4 students who had been notified their awards were suspended received calls telling them the money was back and they should re-enroll. 2 of them cried on the phone. One of them told Megan he had almost quit his program entirely. We funded 3 new vocational training partnerships with community colleges in cities where trade program enrollment had been dropping. We opened applications for the next grant cycle with a 30% increase in available funding. I renamed nothing. The Pratt Memorial Trust stayed the Pratt Memorial Trust. This was Carol's work, not mine. My job was just to make sure it did what she'd always meant it to do. Milford returned to normal the way small towns do, not with speeches or acknowledgments, but with small, quiet gestures that mean we were wrong, and we're not going to say it directly, but here is a casserole. Patty from next door knocked on my door one evening with a plate of brownies and a story about how she'd just been very busy lately. I thanked her for the brownies and left it at that. Phil came over most Thursday evenings and we sat on the porch and drank beer and talked about whatever came up. His grandkids, the state of the garden, normal things, the kind of things that keep you grounded when your life has taken a turn you didn't see coming. One Sunday in November, Megan and I sat in a booth at a diner in Indianapolis. The coffee actually good this time. Do you think she knew? Megan asked. About Marsh, about all of it, how bad it really was. She knew something was wrong. She was building a file when she died. She just didn't know how far he'd taken it. She trusted you with the whole thing, and you'd been divorced for 20 years. Megan shook her head slowly. That's something. She knew who I was, I said. We stopped being married, but she still knew who I was. Megan looked out the window at the November street. I spent a lot of years being mad at both of you for the divorce, for the way things went quiet between us. And now, I don't know. This whole year feels like something she arranged. Maybe she did, I said. Carol always planned 10 steps ahead. Megan smiled, and for a second she looked exactly like her mother, and it was a good thing to see. I still live in the same brick ranch house on the dead-end street in Milford. Same 2011 pickup, though the oil leak is fixed now. I still water the garden on Saturdays and eat cereal 6 mornings out of 7. The trust pays me nothing. I didn't want it to. I have my pension and I have my house, and that's always been enough. What I do have now is something harder to put a name on, a reason to drive to Indianapolis twice a month, a board meeting where people argue about how to do the most good with money that was almost destroyed by someone who didn't believe in anything except himself. A daughter who calls me most evenings now instead of every other Sunday out of obligation. What I learned this year is something I maybe should have already known, having spent 31 years teaching teenagers how to use their hands. The thing that lasts is never the thing that gets taken from you. It's the thing you decide to do with what's left after the taking. Carol had an $80 million estate, and it almost became the private fund of a man who golfed too much and believed in nothing. What she left behind instead was a letter and a key on a hook inside a painted jewelry box and a line of handwriting that said, "Trust yourself." She gave me back the jewelry box for a reason. I understand that now. She was leaving me a way in, just in case she ran out of time, just in case the thing she'd built needed someone to come and fight for it. I'm not a complicated man. I fix things. I teach people how to fix things. I believe in the satisfaction of a job done right and the quiet that comes after. Carol knew that. In the end, that was exactly what the job needed. The last thing I did before the first full board meeting of the reorganized Pratt Memorial Trust was drive to a vocational school in Fort Wayne that the trust funds. I didn't announce myself. I just walked in and asked if I could look around. A young teacher in a welding shop showed me around, told me about his students, showed me the equipment they'd been able to buy with the last grant cycle. One of his students was a 17-year-old girl rebuilding an engine for the first time. She was completely focused, the kind of focus that means you found the thing you're supposed to be doing. The shop smelled like oil and metal and possibility. I signed the visitor log on the way out. Just my name, no title. On the drive back, I thought about a girl at 26 sitting on a tailgate eating a gas station sandwich, telling me she was going to build something that lasted. She did. It just took a little longer than either of us expected. That's the story of Ray Calloway and the inheritance trap. If this one hit you the way it hit me, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the Payback Files. We put out new stories every week about real people who refuse to stay down. Hit the like button, drop a comment telling me what part got you the most, and thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.